Fiancée pushed the Mafia Boss's mother, but the Black Maid destroyed her evil plan in front of everyone. She smiled for the cameras, kissed his cheek in front of everyone, and called his mother family. But behind closed doors, she shoved a 70-year-old woman into a marble staircase and walked away like nothing happened. Nobody saw it. Nobody, except the one woman everyone in that house had learned to ignore. A woman who wore a uniform, carried a mop, and noticed everything. She didn't say a word that night. She just started watching. And 3 weeks later, in front of the entire family, she opened her mouth, and everything this fiancé built came crashing down. Hey, welcome back, friend. I'm so glad you're here with us today. Before we dive in, where are you watching from tonight? Drop your city or your country's flag in the comments. We love seeing how far this little community stretches. Today's story is one of the most emotional ones we've told in a long time. It's about power, pride, and the people we overlook until the moment they save us. Get comfortable, because this one's going to stay with you. She had learned a long time ago that the quietest people in a room usually see the most. Loretta Simmons had worked inside the Kane family estate for 11 years. She started as a part-time housekeeper when Eleanor Kane's hip first began giving her trouble, back when Marcus Kane was still a lanky 29-year-old trying to hold his late father's business together with white knuckles and borrowed time. 11 years later, Marcus was 40, broad-shouldered and gray at the temples, one of the most powerful men in the city, the kind of man other men lowered their voices around. And Loretta, 37 now, was still there. Still the first one awake in that enormous house. Still the one who knew which floorboard creaked outside Eleanor's bedroom and which window let in a draft in October. The Kane estate sat on 11 acres just outside the city, behind iron gates and a line of old oak trees that had been there longer than the house itself. From the road, it looked like something out of a magazine. White columns, a circular driveway, a fountain that Eleanor insisted on keeping running even in winter because she said silence made the house feel like a mausoleum. From the inside, if you knew where to look, it looked like something else entirely. It looked like a family trying very hard to hold itself together. Loretta's morning started at 5:30. Coffee first, always for Eleanor, black, 1 sugar, in the blue mug with the chipped handle that nobody else was allowed to throw away. Then the kitchen, then the long hallway windows, then whatever the day decided to throw at her. She liked the quiet hours best, before the house woke up and the tension crept back in like water finding a crack. She liked humming old gospel songs under her breath while she worked, songs her mother used to sing in a kitchen half the size of this one, back in a small house in Georgia that Loretta still dreamed about sometimes. She had a son, Marcus's age nearly, though he lived 2 states away now with a wife and a baby girl Loretta had only met twice. She sent money when she could. She called every Sunday. She told herself that was enough, even on the nights the house felt too big and too quiet and too far from anything that felt like home. Eleanor Kane was the reason Loretta stayed. Not the salary, not the room she'd been given on the East Wing, not even the strange stability of the place. It was Eleanor, sharp-tongued, soft-hearted, 70 years old with a laugh like a bell and eyes that missed nothing. Eleanor treated Loretta less like staff and more like the daughter she never had. They drank tea together in the afternoons when Marcus was at the office. Eleanor told her stories about Marcus's father, about the early years, about grief she never fully let go of. Loretta listened. She always listened. Which was why, the day Vanessa Hale walked into that house for the first time, Loretta felt something tighten in her chest that she couldn't quite name. Vanessa was 30, stunning in the effortless way that made people assume she'd never worked hard for anything in her life, though anyone who really knew her would tell you that wasn't true. She had worked hard, just not at the things people usually meant when they said it. She arrived on Marcus's arm in a red dress that cost more than Loretta's monthly wage, laughing at something he'd said, touching his jaw like she'd known him for years instead of months. Marcus introduced her to the staff with obvious pride. He introduced her to his mother with something closer to nervous hope. "Mom, this is Vanessa," he said, standing a little straighter than usual. "I want you to give her a chance." Eleanor had smiled the polite smile she reserved for people she hadn't made up her mind about yet. Loretta, standing near the doorway with a tray of appetizers, watched Vanessa's eyes move across the room in a single practice sweep, cataloging the art on the walls, the size of the chandelier, the weight of the silver in Loretta's hands, before landing back on Eleanor with a warmth that arrived a half-second too late to be real. Loretta had seen a lot of things in 11 years. She had learned to tell the difference between people who loved this family and people who loved what this family had. Over the following months, Vanessa became a fixture in the house. She redecorated the east sitting room without asking. She corrected the caterers in front of guests. She called Loretta "sweetie" in a tone that managed to sound both friendly and faintly condescending, the kind of tone people used when they'd already decided you didn't matter enough to remember your actual name. Loretta didn't complain. She'd learned a long time ago that complaining rarely changed anything, but paying attention usually did. And there was plenty to pay attention to. Vanessa was sweet to Marcus, dazzling to his business partners, charming to anyone whose opinion of her seemed to matter. But Eleanor, quiet, aging, occasionally forgetful Eleanor, who sometimes repeated a story twice in one conversation, got a different version of Vanessa entirely. Small things at first. A sharp sigh when Eleanor asked a question twice. An eye roll behind Eleanor's back that Loretta caught in the reflection of the hallway mirror. A comment dropped casually at dinner about how some people shouldn't really be at public events anymore for their own dignity. Marcus never seemed to notice. He was busy, stretched thin across a business empire that demanded every hour he had, and when he was home, Vanessa made sure his attention stayed exactly where she wanted it. Eleanor noticed, though. Loretta could see it in the way the older woman's shoulders had started curling inward, the way she'd begun asking Loretta to sit with her more often, the way her once booming laugh had grown quieter. "She doesn't like me very much," Eleanor said one afternoon, stirring sugar into her tea that didn't need stirring anymore. "She doesn't know you," Loretta said gently. "That's different." Eleanor gave a small, tired smile. "I don't think she wants to." Loretta didn't have an answer for that. She just refilled the older woman's cup and sat with her a little longer than she needed to, the way she always did when something in the house felt like it was quietly, slowly, coming apart. "What's your take? Have you ever noticed someone in your own life who seemed sweet to everyone except the person who mattered most? Let us know in the comments." The engagement party was Vanessa's idea, and it was, by every outward measure, a triumph. 200 guests filled the Kane Estate's grand lawn under strings of warm lights, waiters weaving between tables with trays of champagne, a string quartet playing something soft and expensive-sounding near the fountain. Vanessa moved through the crowd like she'd been born into it, laughing at the right moments, touching the right elbows, making sure every important person in the city saw the ring on her finger catch the light. Loretta worked the event from the edges, as she always did, refilling glasses, checking on the kitchen, making sure Eleanor had her cardigan when the evening air turned cool. She watched Marcus stand at the center of it all, looking, for once, genuinely happy. She wanted to be glad for him. Some part of her tried to be. But something had been eating at her for weeks now, small and persistent, like a splinter she couldn't quite locate to pull out. It started with the accounts. Loretta wasn't supposed to know anything about the family's finances. That wasn't her job, and she'd never gone looking. But houses like this one had a way of leaking information whether you wanted it to or not. She'd overheard Marcus's accountant, a nervous, careful man named Dale, asking to speak with him privately about some unusual authorizations. She'd seen Vanessa on the phone in the garden late one night, voice low and clipped in a way that didn't match the honeyed tone she used inside the house. She'd noticed new signatures on documents left carelessly on the study desk, documents that, as far as Loretta understood, shouldn't have needed Vanessa's signature at all. She told herself it wasn't her business. She told herself that 11 years of loyalty didn't give her the right to go digging into things that weren't hers to dig into. But then there was Eleanor. Eleanor had started forgetting things. Small things. Where she'd set her glasses, whether she'd already taken her afternoon medication, the name of the gardener who'd worked there for 6 years. Loretta noticed because she noticed everything about Eleanor, the way you notice everything about someone you love. It wasn't serious, not yet, just the ordinary fog of getting older. But Vanessa had noticed too, and she'd started using it. Eleanor gets confused so easily now. Vanessa told a room full of Marcus's business associates one evening, her voice pitched just loud enough to carry, her smile never wavering. We're so worried about her making decisions on her own. It might be time to think about arrangements. Loretta, arranging flowers a few feet away, felt her whole body go still. Eleanor was sitting right there. She heard every word. Loretta watched the older woman's face carefully rearrange itself into something composed, something dignified, something that didn't let the room see how deeply that sentence had cut. It was only later, when Loretta brought her tea to her room, that Eleanor let herself cry. She's trying to make everyone believe I can't think for myself, Eleanor whispered, her hands trembling around the cup. So that when the time comes, no one will question anything she decides for this family. You don't know that, Loretta said, though something cold had settled in her stomach that told her Eleanor might be exactly right. I know my son doesn't see it, Eleanor said. And I know I'm running out of ways to make him look. That night, after the house had gone quiet, Loretta sat in her small room in the East Wing and made a decision that surprised even her. She wasn't going to go looking for trouble, but she also wasn't going to keep pretending she hadn't already found some. She began paying closer attention. Not snooping. She told herself firmly, more than once, that she wasn't snooping, just noticing what was already in front of her, the way she'd noticed everything in this house for 11 years. She noticed Vanessa's phone calls got longer and more secretive as the wedding date approached. She noticed a man in an expensive suit who visited twice while Marcus was traveling, a man Vanessa introduced to no one, and walked out to his car herself, glancing over her shoulder both times. She noticed the way Vanessa's tone changed completely, instantly, whenever Marcus's car pulled into the driveway, soft and sweet, like a switch flipping. She noticed, most of all, the growing impatience in Vanessa's eyes whenever Eleanor was in the room. Something restless. Something waiting. Loretta didn't know yet what she was looking at. But she'd lived long enough and worked in this house long enough to know that restlessness like that rarely stayed quiet forever. Sooner or later, it always found a way to show itself. She didn't have to wait long. Have you ever had a quiet feeling that something wasn't right, long before anyone else noticed? Tell us about it below. It happened on a Tuesday evening, ordinary in every way until it wasn't. Marcus was out of town on business, expected back the following night. The house had settled into its familiar after-dinner quiet. Eleanor in the sitting room with a book she wasn't really reading, Loretta finishing the dishes, the rest of the staff gone for the evening. Vanessa had been on edge all day, sharp with everyone who crossed her path, and Loretta had chalked it up to wedding stress, and left it at that. She wished, later, that she'd paid closer attention. Loretta had just stepped into the hallway with a fresh pot of tea when she heard voices rising near the top of the grand staircase. Eleanor's, gentle and confused, and Vanessa's, tight and furious in a way Loretta had never heard from her before, not even close. You don't get to keep bringing this up, Vanessa was saying, her voice low but shaking with anger. You don't get a say in this family's future anymore. You understand me? I only asked what those papers were for, Eleanor said, and her voice had the particular fragile steadiness of someone trying very hard not to sound afraid. I have every right to ask what's happening in my own son's house. This isn't your house anymore, Eleanor. It's going to be mine. Loretta rounded the corner just in time to see it. Vanessa's hand shot out, not a slap, something worse, a hard, deliberate shove square into Eleanor's shoulder. Eleanor, standing near the top of the marble staircase, staggered backward, her arms flailing for a railing that wasn't close enough to catch. For one endless, silent second, Loretta's whole body seized with a fear so sharp it felt like ice water in her veins. Eleanor's hip caught the edge of the top step. She went down hard, a cry breaking out of her that echoed up the stairwell, her body crumpling onto the landing in a way that made Loretta's tea tray clatter out of her hands and shatter against the floor. For one moment, Vanessa didn't move. She looked down at Eleanor with an expression Loretta would never forget, not horror, not guilt, but something closer to cold calculation, like a woman checking whether a mistake could still be cleaned up before anyone noticed. Then she saw Loretta standing at the bottom of the stairs. Vanessa's whole face transformed in an instant, panic sliding into place like a mask. "Oh my God." She fell. "Loretta, call someone." "She just fell. I tried to catch her." Loretta didn't answer. She was already moving, taking the stairs two at a time, kneeling beside Eleanor on the landing, checking her breathing, her pulse, the pained way she held her hip and gasped for air. "Miss Eleanor. Miss Eleanor, I'm here. Don't move, I've got you." Eleanor's eyes found Loretta's, wide and shining with tears and shock. Her lips moved, barely audible. "She pushed me." Loretta's whole body went cold and steady at once, the way it sometimes did in the worst moments, when there was no room left for anything but action. "I know," she said quietly, only for Eleanor to hear. "I saw." Behind her, Vanessa was already on the phone with emergency services, her voice pitched perfectly into panic, already rehearsing the story she would tell. A stumble, a tragic accident, nothing more. Loretta stayed on that landing with Eleanor's trembling hand gripped in hers, saying nothing to Vanessa at all, filing away every word, every second, every look on that woman's face like evidence she intended to keep. The ambulance came. Eleanor was taken to the hospital with a fractured hip and bruised ribs, shaken but alive. Marcus flew home the moment he got the call, ashen-faced, gripping his mother's hand in the hospital room while Vanessa stood nearby dabbing at dry eyes with a tissue, telling anyone who would listen how terrifying it had been, how she'd never forgive herself for not catching her in time. Loretta stood in the corner of that hospital room, silent, watching the woman lie to a man's face about hurting his mother, and she made herself a quiet promise. She wasn't going to say anything yet. Not until she had more than her own word against Vanessa's. Not until she could make sure that, this time, the truth couldn't be pushed aside the way Eleanor had been. What would you do if you were in Loretta's place? Tell us honestly in the comments. The next morning, before the sun had fully risen, Loretta sat at the small desk in her room with a notepad and began to write down everything she had seen and heard over the past several months. Every phone call, every visitor, every signature, every cruel word said in Eleanor's direction. For the first time in 11 years, she stopped telling herself it wasn't her place to get involved. It was exactly her place. She had simply been waiting for the moment that made it undeniable. Eleanor came home from the hospital 10 days later, moving slowly with a cane and a guarded new wariness in her eyes that broke Loretta's heart every time she saw it. Marcus hovered over his mother with the anxious devotion of a man trying to make up for something he couldn't quite name, though Loretta suspected he still didn't fully understand what he was making up for. Vanessa had spun the story so carefully, so sympathetically, that most of the household had accepted it without question. The poor thing was so shaken, she told visitors, hand pressed to her chest. "I still have nightmares about it." Loretta held her tongue. It cost her something every single day to do it, watching that woman perform grief for an accident she'd caused herself, but Loretta had learned patience in 100 harder ways over the years, and she wasn't about to throw away a plan for the satisfaction of a single angry outburst. Instead, she got to work. She started small. She began keeping a careful log, dates, times, what she'd seen, what she'd overheard, hidden in a notebook tucked inside her Bible. the one place in that house she was certain no one would think to look. She paid closer attention to the mysterious visitor in the expensive suit, and one afternoon, while bringing coffee to the study where Vanessa had left her laptop unattended for exactly 4 minutes, Loretta glimpsed enough of an open email thread to understand something that turned her stomach. Vanessa wasn't just careless with money. She was moving it. Small transfers here, larger ones disguised as wedding expenses there, documents pre-signed with the power of attorney Eleanor had absolutely never agreed to grant. The man in the suit wasn't a wedding planner or a family friend. He was a lawyer, and not the kind of lawyer who worked in daylight. Loretta didn't understand every detail of what she was looking at, but she understood enough to know it was building towards something bigger than a stolen inheritance. It was building toward Vanessa controlling everything, with Eleanor legally silenced, and Marcus none the wiser until it was far too late to stop it. She thought about going to Marcus directly. She almost did, twice. But she also knew Marcus, knew how deeply he loved this woman, how thoroughly Vanessa had wounded herself into his life, how easily the maid has a grudge could be twisted into the explanation he'd want to believe over the truth. She needed proof. Not her word. Proof. So Loretta did something she had never once considered doing in 11 years of quiet, careful service. She began, gently and without a single wasted word, to build an alliance. She confided first in Eleanor, showing her the notebook, watching the older woman's hands shake as she read through weeks of careful documentation. "I knew it," Eleanor whispered. "I knew I wasn't imagining it." "You weren't," Loretta said. "And we're not going to let her make you believe you were." Together, they brought in Dale, the nervous accountant who had raised concerns about unusual authorizations months earlier and had been quietly sidelined ever since. Dale, it turned out, had his own uneasy paper trail, numbers that didn't add up, transfers he'd been pressured to approve without asking too many questions. He'd been afraid to speak up alone. He wasn't afraid anymore, not with Eleanor and Loretta standing beside him. Then came the harder part, waiting. The wedding was 3 weeks away. Vanessa, sensing nothing, grew bolder by the day, more careless with her comments, more open with her contempt for Eleanor in moments she assumed no one important was watching. She didn't realize that no one important had become the most important person in that house. 2 days before the wedding, everything nearly fell apart. Vanessa found Loretta's notebook. Loretta had made one mistake, leaving it in her room a half-hour longer than she should have while helping the caterers set up in the ballroom. She came back to find her door slightly ajar, her Bible moved an inch from where she always kept it, and a cold, sick feeling settling into her stomach. Vanessa said nothing about it directly. But that evening, her eyes met Loretta's across the dinner table with a new, dangerous stillness, and Loretta understood, with total clarity, that the woman knew exactly what she'd found. "You've been very attentive lately," Vanessa said lightly, twirling wine in her glass. "Careful, Loretta. This house doesn't need people stirring up trouble right before a wedding." It wasn't a warning. It was a threat, dressed up in a smile. Loretta held that gaze without flinching. "I've always paid attention, Miss Hale," she said evenly. 11 years of it. I don't plan on stopping now." Vanessa's smile didn't move, but something behind her eyes went cold and hard, and Loretta understood that whatever was coming, it would have to come soon. There was no more time to wait for the perfect moment. She would have to make one. Have you ever had to gather your courage slowly, piece by piece, before finally standing up to someone? We'd love to hear how you found the strength. The wedding day arrived bright and unbearably beautiful, the kind of golden autumn afternoon that made the Kane estate look like something out of a dream. 250 guests filled the same lawn where the engagement party had been held months earlier, white chairs arranged in perfect rows facing an arch wrapped in ivory roses. Marcus stood at the altar in a charcoal suit, looking every bit the powerful, composed man his city knew him to be, except for the small, nervous smile that gave away how much this day actually meant to him. Loretta stood near the back of the crowd in her best dress, not her uniform, at Eleanor's insistence. "You'll stand with the family today," Eleanor had told her that morning, gripping her hand. "Whatever happens." The ceremony began. Vanessa walked down the aisle radiant in white, every eye in the crowd on her, every phone raised to capture the moment. She reached the altar. She took Marcus's hands. The officiant opened his book and began the familiar words about love and commitment and the promises two people make to build a life together. "If anyone here has any reason why this couple should not be joined in marriage," the officiant said, in the ordinary, ceremonial tone that nobody ever expects to matter, "speak now, or forever hold your peace." The pause that followed was supposed to last 3 seconds. Everyone in that crowd had heard the line 100 times at 100 weddings, and everyone knew it was a formality nobody actually answered. Loretta stood up anyway. The gasp that rippled through the crowd was audible, a wave of shifting fabric and turning heads. Vanessa's face drained of color in an instant. Marcus stared at Loretta with an expression somewhere between confusion and dawning dread, the look of a man who trusted this woman enough to know she wouldn't do this without cause. "I'm sorry, Mr. Kane," Loretta said, her voice steady even as her heart pounded against her ribs. "I've worked in this family for 11 years. I've loved this family for 11 years. And I cannot stand here and watch you marry a woman who pushed your mother down that staircase and has spent months stealing this family's future while everyone believed her lies." The crowd erupted into stunned murmurs. Vanessa's composure cracked instantly, fury and panic warring across her face. "This is insane. She's a maid, Marcus. She's clearly—" "I have proof," Loretta said, cutting through the noise, holding up the notebook she'd carried in her purse all morning, praying she wouldn't need it and knowing, deep down, that she would. "Bank transfers. Forged authorizations. A lawyer she's been meeting with in secret to seize control of this family's assets the moment Miss Eleanor was declared unfit to manage her own affairs. Unfit because Vanessa has spent months trying to make her look that way, in front of everyone who matters to this family's business." Dale stepped forward from among the guests, his voice shaking but clear. "It's true, Marcus. I tried to tell you months ago. I should have tried harder. I'm sorry." Eleanor rose from her seat near the front, leaning on her cane, and turned to face her son with tears in her eyes. "She pushed me, Marcus. I told you I fell. I lied because I was scared of what it would do to you to hear the truth. I'm not lying anymore." The silence that followed was the loudest thing Loretta had ever heard. Marcus turned to Vanessa, searching her face for the denial he desperately wanted to find there. What he found instead was something colder. Not shock, not heartbreak, but calculation, the same expression Loretta had seen on that staircase months earlier, a woman rapidly working out whether this could still somehow be salvaged. "Marcus, baby, listen to me," Vanessa said, her voice sliding back into its practiced sweetness even now. "It's not what it sounds like. I can explain everything, I promise you, just not here, not like this." "Did you push my mother down the stairs?" Marcus asked, his voice quiet in a way that was far more frightening than shouting would have been. Vanessa hesitated. That hesitation told everyone in that crowd everything they needed to know. Marcus stepped back from the altar as if the ground beneath it had cracked open. He looked at his mother, frail and shaking, and finally believed. He looked at Loretta, who had said nothing for months except through her steady, careful presence, protecting a family that had, without ever quite realizing it, become her own. And he looked, last of all, at the woman he'd nearly married, and felt 11 months of careful eyes collapse all at once. "Get her off my property," he said to no one and everyone at the same time. "The wedding is over." Security moved in. Guests scattered into shocked clusters of whispered conversation. Vanessa was escorted from the estate in her wedding dress, her voice rising into threats and denials that grew smaller and smaller as she was walked toward the gate, until the iron doors closed behind her for the very last time. Marcus found Loretta afterward, standing quietly near the fountain, the same fountain Eleanor had insisted on keeping running through every winter for 11 years. He didn't say anything at first. He just pulled her into a hug that surprised them both, the kind of hug between people who had just survived something together. "You could have told me sooner," he said finally, his voice rough. "You wouldn't have believed me sooner," Loretta said gently. "I needed you to see it for yourself." "I almost married her," he whispered. "My mother almost lost everything, and I would have handed it to the woman who hurt her, with my own 2 hands." "But you didn't," Loretta said. "Because somebody was watching. That's all any of us can really do for each other. Watch, and wait for the moment we're needed, and not look away when it comes." Eleanor joined them by the fountain, wrapping one arm around Loretta and the other around her son, the 3 of them standing together in the wreckage of a wedding that never happened and the quiet, sturdy beginning of something that mattered far more. In the months that followed, the fraudulent transfers were reversed, the forged documents thrown out, and Vanessa's carefully built future collapsed as completely as she had once tried to make Eleanor's collapse. Marcus rebuilt his trust slowly, painfully, the way people do after learning how easily they can be fooled by someone who says all the right things. Eleanor healed, in body and in something harder to name, sitting with Loretta over tea every afternoon, laughing again, a little louder each week. And Loretta, steady, watchful Loretta, who had spent 11 years being the quietest person in every room, learned something she carried with her for the rest of her life. Being overlooked isn't the same as being powerless. Sometimes the people who notice the most are the ones nobody thinks to notice at all. And sometimes the truth doesn't need to shout to be heard. It just needs one person brave enough to finally stand up and say it. Thank you so much for staying with this story all the way to the end. Stories like this remind us that the quiet, steady people in our lives, the ones we sometimes take for granted, are often the ones with the biggest hearts and the sharpest eyes. If this story moved you even a little, take a moment today to appreciate someone in your own life who's been quietly watching out for you. If this story touched your heart even a little, do me a favor and hit that like button. It genuinely helps stories like Loretta's reach more people who need to hear them. And if you're new here, please consider subscribing because we share emotional, true-to-life stories just like this one every single week. I'd love to know, has someone quiet and unexpected ever stood up for you when it mattered most? Tell us in the comments below. We read every single one. And if you know someone who needs a reminder that doing the right thing always matters, please share this video with them today. Thank you for being here. Thank you for watching until the very end. And I'll see you in the next story.